11:30. This session is scheduled to go on till 11:45, and we will stick to that, or maybe we might even slightly go a little bit beyond that. We want this to be very much an interactive session between the convention members and the panellists. You heard from all but two of the people who are on the panel here today. You heard from them yesterday. So I'd like maybe to start with asking the two who we haven't heard from, the UCD Women's Graduate Association, represented by Nuala Ryan, and the USI, represented by Laura Harmon. So if both of you would maybe kick off with, telling us, what do you want to tell the convention? Nuala, maybe you will start at your end first.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk.
Can you hear? Yeah.
I situated the submission I made back with the 1937 first submission that were made by the UCD women graduates. And one of the reasons I did that is because of the exciting way that we can link history and link ourselves to the present day to the past day, and also because it was 76 years since it was written, and it suddenly struck me 76 years is an awful long length of time to be looking for something to be done. And what further struck me at that time was, as somebody's alluded to, the diversity. It's not the diversity of women, it's the diversity of the lives of women, the backgrounds they came from, much the same as it is today. So when I look at the real anger that there was at that time, and it's still, nothing has been changed because it's so out of date now, the amendment in itself. There was no particular care given to or attention given to women who choose to stay in the home, or indeed women who had to stay in the home through circumstances. So when we come to the area of care, what I would call the nobility of care, that we have very little regard, a scant regard, traditionally in time, for the caring that's been done within the family, within the community, within the wider family, and that deserves and regards and should be recognised by the respect that it should be given to the carers. Now there are an increasing number of men who do caring, but traditionally it has been women who've done the caring, and there was an attitude over the years, I know it myself, that what else would she be doing? So that's the kind of lack of respect that we want to correct in this. So caring must be respected, not only for the pragmatic reason of what it gives back to the state, but also because of what it enriches our society, enriches ourselves with. So when I come to the last part of the submission that we made, we put in the common good of justice. And the reason we deliberated about that, the common good in itself is a very good word and a good phrase, but it can depend on the dominant culture of the day. It can depend on other things. And I certainly feel that the common good of justice strengthens the common good, because when you deal with the justice of something, you're looking again and allowing for what has become a very diverse society that we live in, the gender differences, the cultural and the whole religious differences, that we have to back up and be strong and have the common good of justice, to strengthen the common good. And that's why we looked for the common good, because with equality is strengthened with justice. And when I look back again, and I've never looked at the Constitution of the 1916 Republic for a long time, but I was coming back from Belfast and I was walking through Connolly Station, and on the wall in Connolly Station in bronze is the 1916 proclamation. And it's absolutely wonderful. In the very early parts of it, the main parts that I read, has to do and assure the equality between the sexes, equality of religion, the equality as citizens, which of course this Constitution is a Republican document. And when I look back on that and we look at the equality that's so broadly and powerfully expressed in the 1916 Constitution, is some of the flavour that we really need to have here in this Constitution, to recognise the true equality. And equality, to me, would be safeguarded with the wording of the common good of justice. So again, I'll just say all power comes from the people, all governmental power, the power of the Constitution, cannot be exercised without the power of the people. So it's a wonderful power that we have. And I'm just sorry it's taken 76 years to come back and look at something as fundamental as women in the home and women outside the home and women in all their glorious diversity and richness of life. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Great. I think that's a great kick-off to what should be a good free-flowing discussion. Laura, what about you?
First of all, I just want to thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to come and speak to you today on behalf of the Union of Students in Ireland. As you may have seen in our submission, one of the points we highlighted, which I think was echoed by many groups, was that Article 41 symbolically implies that there is no life for women outside of the home. And you know, USI would strongly reject that implication and what that has in terms of implied gender roles. Gender stereotyping is something that affects all of us. I mean, from the moment you're born, you're kind of put into different boxes. We also felt, as a lot of other groups felt, that there is an opportunity to amend the article to include the importance that the Constitution places on the role of carers, be they male or female. But we've been running a seminar series recently around the country called Women in Society. We've been trying to generate discussions of, you know, what it means to be a woman in Ireland today on college campuses throughout Ireland, and one of the themes that has been recurring is the importance of language, how we talk about gender, how we talk to men and women, how we describe their traits. And I think, you know, reading the Constitution, we can clearly see that there is a lack of reference to women. It's mainly refers to him and his in the Constitution, but we would say we would be in favour of having a more gender neutral terms, so using maybe the pronoun they as opposed to he, she throughout the Constitution. Not only is that inclusive of male and female, but it's also inclusive of transgender citizens as well, and people who don't identify with the binary definitions of gender. We also have that in the Union of Students of Ireland, our own constitution. We use the pronoun they throughout the constitution. So those are some of the key things. Another key thing that came up in the seminars that we held throughout the country was attitudes to parenting roles and equal parental leave. We felt that was something that needs to be highlighted, and the fact that, you know, it's not just mothers, it's mothers and fathers' rights are very important as well. And again, just going back to, I suppose, the gender stereotyping, this also affects, of course, LGBT families and same-sex parents. It would have an implication in that regard as well, and I think you discussed that yesterday as well from the videos that I was watching. So that kind of sums up our submission, but again, just to kind of say that even within student politics and within student unions, we can see an underrepresentation of females. There are 9 student unions in the Republic of Ireland. They have absolutely no female sabbatical officers elected, and there are only 5 of our student unions that have female presidents. So it's also very evident at the student union level as well. And also, I think, you know, the fact that for undergraduate females to see the statistics that, you know, in general, women in Ireland earn 17% less than men. That's a huge issue for younger women. I think it would be a great start to get that clause amended and to ensure that our constitution is as inclusive as possible of all genders. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Laura. Okay, we'll go to the floor for comment. I will make sure that everybody on the panel has a chance to speak, but I don't want to have a whole set of opening statements, because I think it will be more fluid and better if we go to the floor. And I particularly welcome comments from people who haven't spoken thus far this weekend. On any of the issues now that are before us, I mean, that we've covered a great range of issues. Yeah, Chris.
Morning, folks. My name is Chris Lyons. I'm just wondering about the format in the morning, to be honest, Chairman, because the Q&A session following our sign-off on the ballot paper, this Q&A now is to serve to get rid of any ambiguity on the options we picked? Are we just QAing in general with the
Yeah,
view
it's
to
a more
revising?
open discussion. I mean, it's an
Okay,
open
on
forum.
general
It's
topics
a different
over the
way
weekend.
of, we got comments the last day that perhaps the format we had on the first weekend didn't quite work for the convention members. Going back into round table huddles
Sure.
didn't quite work. This is an alternative option to try. It also, we thought it gave the advantage of allowing some other voices that we didn't have a chance to hear yesterday to be present this morning.
Super.
Yeah.
No, I just didn't want us to go around in circles and rehash the ballot paper again. Perfect.
This is really very much an open forum to get, if there are things on people's minds, obviously related to the issues we're discussing this weekend. We don't we don't need to to discuss the horse meat scandal or anything like that.
No problem. That's okay.
So okay, any other comments?
Aidan Hayden, Table 5. I'm just throwing this out for discussion with the panel. It struck me that, historically, women in particular have derived their economic rights from the status of their husband, like, for example, widow's pension. And we've seen a trend, not just here in Ireland, but internationally, towards individualisation. In other words, where benefits derive from your employment status increasingly. My fear would be that if we don't enshrine some constitutional protection for the role or the wider role of carers, whether that be caring for older people, caring for children, caring for the disabled and so forth, and give it constitutional protection, that we will increasingly see situations where people who are forced in and out of the workforce or choose to come in and out of the workforce are disadvantaged. And for example, we saw, for example, changes to the pension entitlements in not the last budget, the one before that, that's actually going to make it more difficult, particularly for women, because historically it has been an issue for women more than it has been for men. That may change in the future, but we're dealing with the historical situation here, where women will not be able to qualify for pensions because of those changes. In other words, the changes have made it more difficult for people who have entered into and out of the workforce over periods of years. So I'm just wondering, do the panel have any thoughts on that particular sort of issue, the economic and social protections for women in particular and the wider group of carers?
Okay, thanks, Aidan. Let's take if there are another couple of comments before asking the panel to comment. Mary Lou. Mary Lou here first.
Mary Lou MacDonald, Table 3. Nuala, I was really struck by the eloquence with which you recalled the 1916 proclamation, and it's very simple and yet powerful enunciation of values of equality between the sexes and freedom of religious expression and belief. I just want to make a general point, Cathaoirleach, in respect of the Constitution and its equality protections. You have to rummage through very turgid language to find Article 40. You then have to establish, with the aid and assistance of legal experts, that in fact, though not stated explicitly, does cover gender equality and all other areas of equality for citizens. And I just think in the year 2013, in any democratic system, we should have a simple and clear and accessible statement of individual rights and liberties. And I've raised this before, but I want to say it again and maybe get some reaction from the panel in respect of a Bill of Rights for citizens. Members may be aware that under the terms of the Good Friday Agreement, the Irish state is committed to a charter of rights for citizens. But I'm making this pitch really in terms of the notion that rights are only really valuable if they're made real and resourced, but they're also only valuable where citizens in possession of those rights are aware that they have them.
Okay, thank you. Tom.
Tom Burke. I'd like to address this to Laura. She referred in her submission and again this morning to the absence of female officers in the various student unions. The students at third level are generally bright, articulate. I don't accept that they don't have the confidence. Why don't they get involved? And if they can't get involved in a bright, articulate grouping, what hope have we that there will be a bigger involvement in the wider female population in politics in the future? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's go. I want to, in a sense, ask there's been 3 points here made. One is the one by Aideen about the issue of wider role of carers and etc. and social provision. Mary Lou's comment about the Bill of Rights and Tom's comment, which goes directly to Laura. So let's start with that. Laura, could you deal with that first?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Well, from the seminar series, as I say, that we've been holding around the country, one of the key issues that has come up has been confidence, and that women do lack more in confidence than men to run for positions, and they might see themselves as less qualified for something. One of the points that also came up in a study that was done by our gender equality officer last year was that women find it more difficult to visualise themselves in political roles, especially if those roles have been primarily filled by males. So, for example, president positions generally in the past would have been filled by males. So those roles are often perceived as being male roles. So it's difficult for females to actually visualise themselves in the roles. So it might discourage them from running in that regard. Another issue that came up was just networking, the importance of networks in running. And again, I think because women tend to be primarily because the majority of carers are female, because of that responsibility, I mean, when you are a carer, it can be difficult to form those outside networks as well, and to build up that kind of a support in order to stand for an election. So that might be something that is impeding them from contesting an election. Does that answer your question, or?
I mean, this issue was sorry, no, Tom, we're not going back to you. The issue was discussed yesterday, and it was Gail, I think, who spelled out some of the, if you like, inhibitors of women, both at student politics and other politics. Orla, do you want to comment?
I wanted to come in just on Aideen's comment, if
Okay,
that's
fine.
okay,
Yeah.
because I think it's an important one in terms of that whole issue about recognition of care. And I think that, we are faced with a bit of a challenge here in terms of the reality is women take on the major responsibility of care, and it's about how can we, within a new constitution, recognise that and offer more protection, but also aspire to something different. And in our view, it should be about a greater sharing of care work between women and men in society, because it has implications for so many different areas of equality between women and men. And I think that's part of the challenge that we have in terms of the wording that we come up.
Okay. Yeah. Yvonne?
Thank you. I would like to follow on Orla's point by saying that I actually think that it is possible to reconcile the issue that Aideen raised with the issue that Mary Lou raised, which is enshrining in a broad statement of individual rights and liberties the recognition of many different aspects of activities that people do, including caring. So these are not irreconcilable issues, but it's very clear that policy in this regard is way behind the reality of women's and men's lives today, and that's where the big problem arises, the backdrop of policy.
Thanks. Nuala, I think you wanted to get into,
I just wanted to say
Yeah.
about the I think I raised it at the forum. I said this isn't the place, and this probably isn't the place either. But the preamble of the Constitution itself will have to be rewritten. And in that way, it may be possible to have what would be called, or termed loosely, a Bill of Rights. It's just an aside, but there'll be plenty of scope in that to talk about the equality, which is central to what we're dealing with today in the articles.
Yeah.
It's time it was changed. It's
I have
very
to say,
old.
When I reread the preamble,
Yes.
it's right, and we haven't been specifically asked to look at that,
No,
but
but there's
it is
scope.
a matter to which we may have to come back to. Any other comments?
Yeah.
Right.
Tom? Just a brief comment on Tom's point in relation to the student June politics, if you don't mind, Chair. Women for Election were approached recently by St Patrick's College in Drumcondra on this very issue. because St Pat's College Drumcondra has nearly 90% female students, as far as I know, and the student union made up almost entirely of male elected representatives, and all of those on sabbatical offices in particular. And the new president of St Pat's is determined to change the culture in the college so that the leadership reflects the college more accurately. And he has looked a little bit at what the issues are. And like Laura said, the issue of confidence does come up, but really crucially the issue of role models. And I think the reality of that, Tom, is if you're looking at who's the president and who was the welfare officer last year and the education officer and the vice president and so on, and you don't see anybody that looks remotely like you, you're probably not going to consider necessarily going forward yourself. And that's the issue that they're facing at St Pat's. But what they've decided to do is run a series of workshops over the next number of years that are supporting the female students to think about how student union politics impact on them as students and how can they play more active roles. And it's a good example of a soft measure of support that's just trying to push at some of those cultural barriers to make change. And I notice on your table that you've got Senator Ivana Bacik, who is an example of someone who was a leader in student union politics that then went into politics. And one of the reasons he is so determined to do that also, and that we're so behind it, is that it's a really strong indicator. If you're active in student union politics, you're much more likely to continue to be politically active in your life. So you've hit on a place, I think, that's really important to start to try to influence the change. But unfortunately, the confidence barrier still is there.
Okay, thanks, Niamh. Siobhan.
I just wanted to comment on the questions relating to people who take on caring roles who have traditionally been predominantly women and being disadvantaged by that in terms of access to pensions, social security, and all the other disadvantages that can come because of the way in which our pension systems or our social insurance schemes, etc., are constructed. And I think that links in very much to Mary Lou's comments around equality and the scope and meaning of the equality provision within the Constitution. And it was something that Jerry mentioned earlier in terms of we do have an equality guarantee within the Constitution. It in fact has been interpreted and relied on relatively infrequently by the courts. And this is something that was looked at in great detail by the Constitution Review Group. Whether or not this should be strengthened or reviewed in some way. But there's a critical question here that links both of those, and that's how we understand equality and whether or not we are committed to a substantive vision of equality that would capture indirectly discriminatory measures that disadvantage people who choose to or have to take on full-time caring roles as parents or caring for elderly relatives or people with disabilities, and why are they economically disadvantaged by doing that in terms of the social security system, in terms of our pension schemes, etc. And if a prohibition on indirect discrimination can capture that, a commitment to substantive equality can capture that, because equality isn't about treating everyone the same. It's about ensuring that if you take on a position that is valued by society, whether as a mother, a father, as caring for a disabled sibling, for example, that you should not be disadvantaged by society or by the state in making that choice. And that's about a commitment to substantive equality, and it's about how we understand the equality guarantee and its role and potential within the Constitution. But it does require a commitment to substantive equality and a prohibition on indirect discrimination, which is part of EU law, European law. It's part of how we understand domestic anti-discrimination law as well. But it's something we certainly need to engage more with at a constitutional level.
Thanks, Siobhan. I want to go to Anya, and then I know Ivana is waiting for a while, but Anya first.
Okay. Thank you very much for those questions. I'll just address mostly Aideen's question. And yes, we have, of course, in Ireland, what was known as the breadwinner model, but is known in most of the rest of Europe as the droit dérivé model, that there was expected to be one job in a household, and that the rights and entitlements would flow from that one job to the members of the household, the other members of the household as defined by law. We're now moving more to an individualised situation all across Europe where your rights are based on employment. But unfortunately, our caring responsibilities have nothing to do with our employment. My own organisation has been looking at the best way to ensure that parents and carers are not disadvantaged. And we feel that the best way, well, it would take me a lot more than the time that we have allotted here today to explain how we see this, but basically we would see that the best way to address this is to have supports that follow the child or the person who needs care, and that whoever looks after the person who needs care then would be able to benefit equally from that income, from the possibility to pay tax, to pay social insurance, and then not to be disadvantaged as a result in their public pension. And just very finally, it is no longer possible to say that you should earn less or nothing for your work because you are a woman. It is still, however, possible to say that the care of that child or the care of that disabled person is not work, not because you're a woman, but because you're that person's mother, because you're that person's father, because you're that person's sister, because you're that person's grandfather. The work needs to be recognised as work, and we need to find a system for supporting the people who carry it out.
Thanks, Sonia. Ivana, you've been waiting patiently there. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. And Ivana Bacik, Table 5, a table with a lively debate. And could I just thank Niamh for your comment, and also just to say that you and Laura have articulated, I think, very clearly the difficulties facing women in going for public office in students' unions. As it's the same difficulties and the same issues, pretty much the same 5 Cs, or at least some of them, that face women in going in participating more in public life and in political life generally. And quite a number of the submissions refer to a 2009 report that I authored for the Oireachtas Committee on Justice, where we set out the 5 Cs and we recommended the legislation on gender quotas, which we now have in place and which I think will make a difference at the next election, which we discussed yesterday. But we did also look at other measures, and just mindful that we have on our ballot paper a question about other measures that can be taken outside of the Constitution to encourage women's participation. I'd just be interested to know your views or the views of other panellists as to what are those sort of measures. One of the things that we were really struck by was in Iceland, an advertising campaign where senior politicians were portrayed in confounding gender stereotypes. So a senior male politician trying on a pair of stockings and high heels, for example, just to make people think, especially young women, think more about the cultural expectations of what they were going to be doing, and perhaps encourage them to go forward into non-traditional roles. And just very finally, Tom, just you referred to the preamble. I mean, I think the question that we now have on the ballot paper about gender inclusive language will actually affect a change to the preamble, which currently refers to Jesus Christ sustaining our fathers through centuries of trial. It's the only reference to fathers in the Constitution. If we make it gender neutral or gender inclusive, we will then have mothers and fathers, thereby referring, I think, properly and appropriately to both parents. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Comment here, Colin, I think. Yeah.
Colin Burke, Table 10. Just it's an issue in relation to Bill of Rights, and in the last referendum on European treaties, we voted on a Charter of Fundamental Rights, and I'm just asking the legal experts as regards, how can that be brought in more? We've accepted that. How we can bring that more into the Irish Constitution, and what role it has in relation to rights here in Ireland. And how do we make people more aware of those rights that are incorporated into that charter?
Let's take one more comment. That sounds as if it might be directed at Jerry, I think, but is there one more comment then, because we've got then of... Yeah, Regina.
Thanks, Tom. Regina Doherty, Table 1. Can I ask the panel's opinion, given that we're here over the weekend to discuss the increased participation of women in politics, and as a profession, given the general public's view of politicians, actually I don't think it's a surprise that we don't have thousands of women jumping up to put themselves forward to be berated on a daily basis the way most politicians are and viewed. I put forward a proposal yesterday to the table. When I was a county councillor, and I was obviously younger in those days, it was a perfect career choice for me, for somebody who wanted to be with my small children, to be able to drop them to school in the morning, go off and do my council work during the daytime, be there for them in the afternoon and the evening for homework and dinners, and then go back to meetings and stuff at night time. And I'm not sure we're actually selling it as a career. I mean, when we sit down with our young people in secondary school to talk about career choices and CO applications and stuff, you never ever discuss politics as a career, maybe as a choice with regard to doing it in college with a view to being researching or something else, but never as a public service career. And I think if we pitched it and sold it in a different way, and the actual value of what we can do at local level and thereafter at national level, it might be seen as very different. Thanks.
We'll hold on for a moment. I'm going to go. Jerry, I think you may be the appropriate person to address Colin's point, are you?
Yep.
Yeah. And then I want to, after that, I want to see if Fiona and Gail have something to say, because you haven't spoken up to now. Yeah.
Yeah, well, as I said earlier, you know, in relation to the guarantee of equality, we probably need a lot more time to discuss that guarantee than is currently available, because there are a number of difficulties in relation to it. I mean, but in answer to the question, you know, how could you enhance gender equality in the Constitution, say specifically in relation to the guarantee of equality? The point I made earlier, maybe you know, the language could be reformulated in such a way, or the courts could interpret the existing language in a way as to give rise to a presumption against gender discrimination. That you would start from the basis that the state should really not discriminate on grounds of gender, and if they're going to do so, should have to produce a compelling case to justify gender discrimination. As Siobhan indicated earlier too, there's the whole question of targeting indirect discrimination. Direct discrimination is where you've got a policy which explicitly says, you know, man and woman, you know, men should be paid this rate and women should be paid the other rate. Okay, so it's out there, it's clear. Indirect discrimination is where you use a term that's neutral, but where in fact you're actually targeting one group more than another. So if you had a clause which said part-time workers shall be paid, or you know, part-time workers shall not get occupational benefits. Part-time workers are predominantly female. And so even though you're affecting some male workers, you're predominantly affecting female workers. So that's indirect or disguised discrimination. The Constitution, the courts haven't yet decided whether or not the Constitution addresses that form of discrimination. That could be clarified. I think, finishing on this point, there is a sort of a happier side to the story. I mean, I forgot to mention when I was talking about the gender discrimination in the Constitution, the fact that in the 1970s the High Court held that the Constitution guaranteed the equal right to earn a livelihood. And so in one particular case where a trade union was taking industrial action to try and exclude female workers from the bar trade, the High Court granted an injunction to restrain picketing. So that's kind of positive. And the other good news story on the equality front is what's happened at the non-constitutional level, at the statutory level. We've had the enactment of what I would consider to be a reasonably sophisticated statutory code covering 9 different grounds of discrimination, including gender, in relation to employment, in relation to the provision of sale of goods and supply of services, in relation to the provision of accommodation, in relation to education, and in relation to the operation of registered clubs. And I think that has taken, for me, a lot of the heat out of the debate around the Constitution, because here you have remedies that people are able to get at the level of an equality tribunal. So I think, you know, we have to acknowledge that as well. But certainly, yeah, I think more could be done around the constitutional guarantee of equality, specifically in relation to gender, but more widely as well.
Thanks, Jerry. Fiona, what would comment from you?
I suppose relating back to Ivana's question and maybe touching partly on what Regina said, yes, there are a number of measures that can be pursued, or soft measures as well as hard, tough measures to encourage more women in politics. I mean, what Neve's group Women for Election is doing around training is very, very important, and you will find that is the training supports that Women for Election are providing. You'll find worldwide similar organisations are doing that sort of thing, and it's not because women don't have as much knowledge of politics, it's not because they're less able, it's not because they're less interested. The competence issue is still a big thing, because I suppose when you look at your political environments, it's largely male dominated, and for many women there's the lack of the role models and they feel they can't access it. So that's one of the things. You will find in a lot of other countries that there's dedicated funding to support women and their campaigns, and it's very interesting if you look at the state funding of our political parties. Of the 12.3 million that the 4 main parties, Fine Gael, Labour, Fianna Fáil and Sinn Féin drew down last year, only 75,000 of that 12.3 million was invested in training women or supporting women within the parties. That's 0.63%. What I would like to see possibly is this measure in relation to the Political Funding Act that has been passed, which is relating state funding to the percentage of women politicians that are running. Maybe it might be maybe something voluntarily on behalf of the parties, that they would say that they will increase the amount of money that they're investing in supporting women's campaigns, because we found out yesterday when we were talking about women's participation around the 5 C's, one of the issues is cash, the lack of money, and whether we like it or not, to run for politics costs money, and with women having less, I suppose, income at their disposal, that's where a dedicated funding, I suppose, could come into play. And you do have, I suppose, in the United States and in Australia, you have things like Emily Zist, which is, I suppose, set up with a particular aim in mind, but that's the sort of model I think we could start working towards. Succession planning. Men are excellent at succession planning. What I mean by that, if a man is coming up to retiring, they're looking ahead to see who's going to be taking up the seat. I don't know, do women think a lot about that? And I think that's something that women could be a lot more clever about. If a woman is currently in politics and her seat and she's planning not to run the next time, maybe making a concerted effort to say, well, I'm looking for a woman rather than a man. Other things, for me, I would love to see the quota in the current legislation extended to local government, because I think, as we saw in yesterday's presentations again, talking about the political part or the political pipeline, getting women in at the early stages means that they're in that pipeline and feeding through into the national level. I think that will be important. And I think education is very, very important. And coming back, I suppose, more or less to Regina's point there, I think there needs to be an education about the good of politics. I mean, what we're hearing constantly is the negative, whether that's justified or not. But it's constant negative, 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 negative. I think, if you look at the classrooms in the United States and elsewhere, there is, I suppose, a concerted effort to teach kids from a very, very young age about politics, and in particular in relation to girls and boys at a young age. They're all encouraged to be as, able as the next to run for politics. So I think, yes, politics probably needs from a very early age up, I think we need to be educated about the good of politics. Okay, let us grow up and become more questioning and cynical or whatever of it, but I think we need to have that invested at an early age, and certainly at the early age, catch kids when they're 5, 6, 7, to inspire them, both girls and boys, that they are as able and as willing and as capable to run for politics. So those would be a few things. Other small things that come up as well, a lot of women in politics will say, practical supports. So, on the canvas, having someone, to offer support in relation to do a bit of the child minding, or, making sure that someone is at home to literally meet the kids when they come home from school, if they are out campaigning. Practical supports like that as well comes up in the literature as being quite useful.
Thanks very much. I know that I want Gail to come in because she hasn't spoken yet, and after that, Siobhan and Orla. Okay.
A lot of the comments from the floor have kind of focused on a lot of comments from the panel on a lack of confidence of women. And there was some skepticism, particularly from Tom Burke at one of the tables, that women don't lack confidence. And I see where you're coming from. And perhaps another way of conceiving of it is this, to conceive of it as a political ambition gap. There are loads of confident women in this room, and they're confident in their professional careers. But the reality is that women who by all objective standards are qualified to run do not see themselves as qualified to run. Very accomplished accountants, lawyers, doctors and consultants who are very, very capable in their professional lives do not actually, perceive of themselves as qualified to run. Whereas men, the equivalent men would just, I'll give it a go. And I suppose one way of looking at it, and this was touched on by somebody from the floor over here, is there is this puzzle. Women have risen the ranks of the legal profession, the health profession, and why have they not risen in the political sphere? And you were absolutely right. It's because it's not seen as a profession, and definitely not seen as a noble profession. And in part this is because if you want to become a doctor, you know exactly what you need to do. You go talk to a doctor, you go to university, you do an internship, you become a consultant, a GP, so on and so forth. Same in the legal profession. But how you become a politician is a little murky to men and women. You know, how do you actually get there? And a lot of it in Ireland, it's dynastic, and your uncle, your father is a TD. You kind of get you get the inside scoop at the breakfast table. And for a lot of women on the outside, it's not as clear. The ladder to becoming a professional politician is quite obscure. So I think we need to make that a lot clearer, how to become recruited, and especially if you don't come from a political family, okay? It really, really is murky. Another point is, women may be a little more risk adverse, and this was touched on, and that's not a negative thing. If we had more risk adverse bankers, we wouldn't be in the trouble we're in now. But it is a career that you do have to expose yourself a lot more than you were if you were in a health professional or you become a lawyer or leading barrister. You're exposed to public scrutiny, and particularly in Ireland, you're expected to knock on doors and be at the beck and call of constituents. And it's also not secure. You have to put yourself up for election every 5 years or so, and that requires a very robust character. And why women are more risk adverse than men, on average, we don't really know the results of that, whether it's socialization or it's something more biological. But political life is tough, and there are easier ways of making money, and they're not, they get a lot of grief and are disrespected a lot at the moment. And, we need to underscore that it is public service, and it is actually a noble profession and one worth pursuing in education.
Thanks, Gail. I do want to just note that we are getting close to the end of this session, so anybody who's speaking from here on, could I ask them to be brief? Siobhan first, and then Orla.
So very briefly, in response to, I think, Colm's comment about the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights, and I think that touches into the earlier comment around the Good Friday commitment to a Bill of Rights and an engagement with an All-Ireland debate on a Bill of Rights. I think it's really important, because I think we do actually have a chapter on fundamental rights in the Constitution. We're also a party to the European Convention on Human Rights, which is actually part of Irish law since 2003. We have the European Convention on Human Rights Act. But actually there is very little engagement, even with the constitutional document, with the chapter on fundamental rights, and certainly around the European Convention on Human Rights. And I think on the debate around the Bill of Rights, there has been much more engagement on the ground in Northern Ireland than we've had here. So I think that's quite an important point around education, awareness raising, engagement with these documents. And it's also something that you would see in other countries, a lot more engagement with at schools level, involving kids, going back to Fiona's comment also, to educate people, to engage with those and think about how they can be used more proactively in our day-to-day politics. Yeah.
Thank you. Orla.
Yeah, just 3 quick points, and I suppose mainly in response to Ivana's, but I think the issue of what other measures are needed is important, and from our point of view in the Women's Council, we need to have far more family-friendly structures in the Oireachtas. I mean, for example, there's no maternity leave for TDs. And also, I think what's really important is that for many women, a really positive training ground to become involved in politics is in local community-based women's organisations. And we have to face a reality that when we start talking about how we can encourage women to move forward in that regard, that at the same time what's happened over the last 5 and 6 years is that as a result of austerity, so much funding has been cut from those community groups. And there's a disconnect, because for women who don't have the cash and who aren't involved in political families, it's really difficult to make those transitions, and you also need a lot of support. And so many women's groups have said to us that it has become a lot more difficult. Focus has changed in terms of the work that's now happening. And so we need to nurture and we need to support those women's locally community-based organisations if we're serious about creating a greater diversity and more women at a national level. And just finally, because I think the point that Regina made is really important, in that we need to create more role models, but also really encourage young women in terms of moving forward in that career. I mean, just as a really simple anecdote, last week, I accompanied a member of my family to an open day in a college. And when I walked in the door, one of the staff in the college said, "Are you here for healthcare or childcare?" And my face dropped. It just dropped, and I was speechless. And that's there. That's, sexism is actually alive and well in our society. So we need to create very different role models for young women. And we absolutely need to say politics is a career.
Well, thank you. I'm going to take 3 brief comments from the floor from tables 4, 3 and 8. Oh, very quick. Yeah. Okay, 4, 3, 8 and 1. And then I'm coming back to the panel and we'll close it out. Table 4. Is it? Oh, well, you both. Okay, all right.
Okay, thank you.
You can share your time as established parliamentarians.
Stephen Agnew, I'll try to be brief. I'm just interested if anyone in the panel has a knowledge of the Welsh model. Obviously, it's a Welsh Assembly as opposed to a Parliament, but my understanding is they have 50-50 male-female representation, and how that came about, how they developed that, what type of model was it. And I think just a point to note, while we talk, will parliaments be better off? Will better decisions be made if more women? One thing they've looked at is children's budget and try to trace how much money they actually spend on children. Now, it's an ambitious thing and a very difficult thing to do. I think it's a very positive, very progressive thing, and I think it's. I'm kind of surprised throughout the weekend it hasn't really been mentioned. So, just if any panel members have a knowledge of it, how and why did they take that decision forward?
Thanks, Stephen. Francis.
Just a brief point. I mean, I think it's quite disturbing to hear what Laura and Niamh had to say today in relation to younger women. And it's just reinforced. It's quite, I mean, in some ways it's quite depressing to hear it. And it points to a lot of wider cultural factors still at play. And, it strikes me that if we are to get to the critical mass of women and men working together, even of 30%, that we're going to have to see action on a whole range of areas. And if the Constitution is the vision statement for our country, we want it to reflect our values, it seems to me that we'll need to have it there as well as in all of the other ways that our panel have mentioned today, that all of the legislative action and positive action as well. And I just wanted to say that while the legislation that we brought in at the 30% is really important, it came up yesterday. I mean, it's really important to note that it's 30% across the country. Political parties have to have 30% of candidates. It's just to get on the ticket. It doesn't mean we're going to have a Dáil with 30% of women the next time, unless all of, those women get elected, which is it's a possibility. Let's not rule it out. But I'm just making the point that we still need initiatives in a whole range of areas to make the kind of breakthroughs we're talking about here today. And I think it's really illustrated by, what the women had to say about the confidence issues on younger women. And I think it raises huge questions about what messages are we still giving to women about this area, being involved in politics and public life, if the paid positions in students' unions are still almost, a veto for women. It seems extraordinary.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that is a very solid conclusion from a lot of the discussions we've had. Michael.
Thank you. Michael McCarthy, Table 3. Just a couple of points. I think, and this ties in with what Fiona had said, I think the gender quotas would have been a better policy decision at local level. The vast majority of TDs and senators who were elected began their careers in politics at local council level. And that stands to reason. So I think the gender quotas possibly may be more effective at that level. The standing of politics and politicians has never been worse. And I think we always see that every couple of years. But it is down there in the mirror, in the gutter. And there's a lot of cynicism towards the body politic in general. That in itself is very off-putting for men and for women. And I think until we address robustly how relevant politics is to us and restore an element of respect and dignity about the debate, then we're very much going to go around in circles. The Oireachtas outreach education system had a very good system whereby they went into second level schools and they spoke to students about politics, about the Oireachtas and how it operated. That was shelved, unfortunately, in the context of cutbacks. There's another significant issue in terms of educating people about politics. There's an hour a week of CPSE in second level schools. That finishes after the junior cycle. And the next educational opportunity for people who are interested in politics is a third level degree. So there's a huge morass there that needs to be continued, and I think that's the critical area in which you go into it. Just one final point is one of the panellists yesterday said we should take power away from politicians. I disagree fundamentally, and in the overall context of debating and encouraging and empowering women in politics, we should not, in my view, take counterproductive stances, and we should also look at the barriers. And some of the barriers that affect women also affect men. I know well-established male politicians who have a morbid fear of speaking in public. That sounds very contradictory, but that is the case. The confidence issue, I think, is, to use that term this morning, is gender neutral, and we should also look at aspects that affect younger people and prevent younger people from taking careers in politics.
Thanks, Michael. Table 8.
Catherine Noon.
I'd like to support a lot of what Michael had to say there, and Regina, especially on the image of politicians and the respect for politicians. And I think we've become a country where one of the favourite pastimes is politician bashing, and it is quite depressing as a politician to have to always have that type of cynical comment made to you, because at the end of the day it is a profession, and I think the more that we nurture it as a profession from a young age in the country, the better. I have to say that personally, and I don't know whether it's because it's more recently or it's because of myself or the exposures that I've had, I haven't come across any situation in politics where I felt like I was inhibited because of my gender. And that's genuine, and really genuinely do not think that I can identify one situation. But I do think that Leinster House, and it's not because of anyone's particular, badness or anything of the sort, but Leinster House is an inherently sexist place, and a lot of male colleagues, and I certainly would not include a lot of them who are here present, and it's nothing that's aimed at anyone, but that they say sexist things towards women without even realising that they're sexist, and that's something that I think, it's very subtle, but it's quite difficult, especially for a younger woman in politics, to cope with. And I argue with it, and I've been told that I have to argue every time that something like that happens, and I've been accused of flirting my way, etc., into certain things, which is, it's never going to be said to a male, and it's completely and utterly inappropriate and very disrespectful. I do have concerns as well with the gender quota, and I'd be interested in what the various panellists have to say with regard to tokenism, and to the fact that I've had it said to me in the recent past that, you'll definitely be running in the next general election. She will need women to run, and I take somewhat exception to that type of a comment as well. So thanks very much for the weekend.
Thank you, Catherine. Ciara, this is the last word from the floor. Okay?
Thanks very much. I suppose I felt, as the youngest woman in the Dáil, I should really say something about this. And as somebody who did come up through the ranks of student union politics, local authority politics, and into the Dáil, it does work, and I actually only had 3 weeks of a campaign to get elected to the Dáil. So if you can put your mind to it, and the support there, which I have to say from my party have been excellent. And a question I'd like to put to you, Chairman, in the organisation of this weekend and subsequent weekends: did the issue of childcare ever arise? Because I think that there are people who would really like to be here but who can't be here because childcare wasn't provided. And I, for one, am very proud of the fact that the Labour Party, over a number of years, through my badgering of them, it has to be said, provide childcare now when conferences are taking place at the weekend. And I think that that's something all of us need to remember, that there are people who cannot be here because of the very fact they've made the choice to stay at home and look after their children, and predominantly, unfortunately, that's women. And I think that's important to say. And there's just one other thing I wanted to say, and I think it's really, really important, and it's the personal is political. And that's the feminist statement, and that I think would acknowledge, a lot of people would acknowledge, that is how people got involved in politics in the first place, that their own personal circumstances, the fact that I was a single parent in college was the thing that politicised me and got me involved. And I think that there's probably something personal to everybody in this room that would politicise them, but people need to be able to know that they can take that step. And just the final point that I wanted to make was, and it's a very a touchy subject, because it's about the fact of how we pay our politicians. And going back, a lot of people have spoken about getting young people and young women involved in local authorities. But the reality is we don't pay local authority councillors. They don't make the contribution to allow them to have maternity leave. The PRSI stamp that they put up is not sufficient. So if we are going to talk about politics as being a profession, we must also grasp the thorny leaf or the nettle or whatever you want to call it, that we also must pay people so that they can allow them to participate. And I think that's really important. Very unpopular to talk about, but realistically, if we don't do that, it ain't going to happen.
Thank you. I just want to take stock now where we are. We're 7 minutes to 12. I'm going to stop this session at 12 o'clock because we're going to require you to vote by 12:15. Because we need to give time for the people to count the votes, and we would like a volunteer from the citizens to act as teller. So if anybody from the citizens could who is there a volunteer as a teller? Keith, okay, thank you. Now, I need to give a couple of people on the panel have indicated they want to talk. I want again encourage them to be brief. Yvonne first.
Thank you, Chairman. I will be brief. I'm going to link a couple of points just to answer Stephen Agnew. The Welsh Assembly and the Scottish Parliament were built on the principle of equality of opportunity as they were being set up, and that made the difference because they gave substantive effect to that principle of equal opportunity. And the one thing that can be done without any constitutional change whatsoever is for our decision makers to take equality of opportunity seriously as a principle and to begin to include women in a meaningful and substantive way in all policy discussions at all levels at which those policy discussions are held. That will bring women into conversations and will bring them into decision making, will enrich decision making, and can also then feed into the wider question of elected office. So there's much that can be done in the politics of the small p as well as the politics of the large P.
Thanks, Yvonne. Nuala. Sorry, like you last. Laura, I meant.
Yeah, I just want to address some of the points that were raised from the floor there, particularly just around what we can do outside of the Constitution and in terms of education. Like personally, I think education is a key thing to encouraging participation in general, not just from females but from society as a whole. I think it needs to start from an early age, from primary school, education not only about what equality is and about what rights people have, but also about active citizenship and the value of being an active citizen. I think we need to be telling our children how important they are and how important their voice is, and the difference that they can make in society. I think we need to continue to move away from the kind of I teach, you listen system. We need to keep moving away from that and encouraging more of a participatory education process. And also, I mean, this could continue on to third level. I think there needs to be more recognition of extracurricular activities that students undertake in third level, volunteering in the community, engaging with civil society organisations as well. So just placing more of a recognition on active citizenship within our education in general, I think, is definitely something that needs to happen.
Thanks, Laura. Anya, briefly.
Yes, I just wanted to say thank you again for letting us attend this, and I wanted to just reflect back to you. Many of the panelists have said, that they're delighted now that they have a chance to speak about this. My own organisation has been speaking about this extensively. We've looked at this article over and over. In 2005, we participated with the All-Party Committee of the Oireachtas on the Constitution, which then produced a report, and our members were hopeful that some progress would be made. Now to see it's on the ballot paper for you, and obviously you have to take your decision, to see that it's on the ballot paper for you to withdraw this significant recognition for unpaid work and the people who carry out unpaid work, especially women and mothers. I have to reflect back to you and say that my members would feel that they would be very disempowered if you voted in that way. They would be very disappointed, and I think it would make my job as an advocate for them much more difficult.
Thank you, Anya. I want to give Nuala maybe the last word. You elegantly opened this session, and I'd like you now to elegantly close it.
Very briefly, that quota systems work. I don't want to spend any more time on it because it's been so well spoken about here, but over the continent, and the data shows that this quota systems work. As Francis has said, it only gets you on the ballot paper. It ensures that you're on the ballot paper, which is quite a feat in the constituency politicking that goes on, but nevertheless you have to work for your place. So there's not a token feminism or not a token seat that you get, but it works. If we look at the data that's coming in from our European counterparts, it certainly works for women. The other last thing that I would say is that the importance of words. I mean, words are, we accept them, we look at them, we don't bother, we don't analyse them a lot of times. This morning, like from Yvonne, I'm very glad to hear the difference, which I knew, but it was so forcefully said the difference between being gender neutral and gender inclusive. That is a whole world of difference, a whole world of difference. So the words that we see every day, that we take him, her, we get it in their churches, we get it in our prayers, we get it on the television, we don't even pay any attention to it, it's just accepted. So I would just say to be alert to the words of equality, the words of justice, the words that are going to come up before you today, in the power that you have to select the words in your truthful and honest deliberations. That will be a whole area for you to actually be the citizens, we the people. Thank you.
Well, I think that is a very appropriate closure. I think all of us as members of this convention need to be acutely conscious of the importance of words. It is the words that we are attempting to identify which should reflect the values of this society and reflect them for, if you like, the decades ahead. And I think that's our fundamental challenge as a convention. I want to thank all the panellists here this afternoon. It's been, I think, a really productive session and very good.